It has been going on for years. It helps. But how many people today try drugs because of plain ignorance? We must admit very few in this country. We have been talking about awareness for decades. Billboards, newspapers, television, advertisements, politicians, everyone talks about drug awareness and saying no to drugs. And we recently have AIDS awareness, but the solution cannot be found in awareness alone. Awareness is the beginning of the solution. It is extremely important to know, to be aware of a problem. But this knowledge is not enough. To properly defend someone against drugs and against contracting the HIV virus, awareness will help somewhat. But the solution is a matter of spiritual awareness and spiritual foundation. Have you seen a mature, orthodox, spiritual person living the sacramental life of the church? Have you seen a person like that end up using drugs? We're not talking here about people who serve in the altar, because we often hear this statement. After some of our young people get to college and they never set foot in church, we often hear, their mothers usually and grandmothers, they're telling us, boy, they grew up in the altar. They were such good kids. They were always in Sunday school. What went wrong? Well, we can't say for sure, but even though they went through the motions, a spiritual foundation was lacking. The altar is a great start, but without a spiritual father, Holy Confession a number of times per year, Holy Communion, teaching of the Word of God, prayer life, and most importantly, a Christian life within the home. Without all these practices, we cannot talk about spirituality. A person that lives his spiritual life, a young person that practices his or her faith, as we described above, will never have to deal with any type of drugs. We have never seen such a person of orthodox spirituality needing to use drugs. Of course, anyone who decides to leave God, to kill God inside of them, and take the road and the way of the world, then this is possible. Please do not be confused from the experience of some drug addicts who have a born-again experience at the prison or at the rehabilitation center, and they become religious for a time. They are preaching and giving testimonies only to end up in prison time after time. I met a young man back in the 1990, and he was extremely interested in our faith, and I made a sincere effort to introduce him to our Orthodox Church. However, he was infected by the heresy of the Pentecostals, and it's the same young man who has been teaching and preaching that Christ would come back to rapture the Pentecostals in 1995. And several years ago, I asked him, I said, well, it's 1995. Now what? Well, this poor young man has been in prison almost every year since 1990. He comes out full of the Spirit, reborn, up until the minute depression sets in, and then he will sell his children's television set to buy cocaine. This is a very, very sad situation. We need to be careful. Not all spirituality will give us the proper foundation, and this is why we are careful to stress Orthodox spirituality. The spirituality of the Eastern Orthodox Church of the 7 ecumenical councils. So a strong spiritual foundation is needed today. And today, more than ever, we must help our young people to find God again. We are encouraged to see a great deal of young people that are turning to God. And they are being saved from these evils. They found God. But is it necessary to lose God first? Why must we lose God first? And if we lose God, do we have a guarantee that we will find Him again? And do you think that a person that used drugs, tried drugs, even once, is the same as the person that never tried drugs, not even once? There is a great difference in these people. There's a substantial difference. We talked about the indelible memory that these substances imprint on the brain. So we do not have a guarantee that this memory will not be triggered by different circumstances many years later. We know that rehabilitation produces some results. Many people become well and live normal lives, but many people do not. Many people quit smoking, but many of them start again 3, 5, 10 years later. If we have this sort of triggering in cigarette smoking, which is much milder, then we can imagine the strength of this triggering in the area of strong narcotics. So today's man must search and find God. He must hunger and thirst for God. And all of you who are here, who come to these studies, and those that are listening to the tapes, you all love God and you are eager and thirsty for Him. And inside of you, there's a strong desire to have communion, to be with Him. Unfortunately, many people today, like the prodigal son, are being fed by carob pods, or xylokerata, as we say in Greek, food for pigs. The prodigal son was feeding on these, which was a substitute for the good food that he gave up in his father's house. He was dying from hunger, and one day he thought to himself, I will return to my father. And he put his plan in action. He returned to his father consciously. He felt that in his heart this time. He realized the importance of staying close to the Father. He did not feel this before he left, and this brought ruin and unhappiness in his life. Happy will be the person, and all of us of course, if we realize ahead of time that we must not leave from the house of our God the Father. Unfortunately, who's going to convince our Goyans today and all the youth that the emptiness and the dissatisfaction of their soul is due to the absence of God? They will scream and shout and rebel. You're wrong. They will tell you that you don't know anything. So they're constantly looking for money to keep up with their fashion of their school friends, to be in. Some of them will steal money, or once they get older, they'll want to run from party to party and from mall to mall, or from a movie theater to movie theater. And they certainly don't want to hear that all this will not put out the thirst and the dissatisfaction of their soul. This thirst is metaphysical, and to try to put it out by the means of MTV and the like is like drinking ocean water. And when you do this, you become thirstier and thirstier. They believe that if they could only be rich, to buy more things, to enter more shopping malls, to travel and live it up, they would find joy and satisfaction of the soul. Father Athanasius relates about a young man who visited him very recently, and he seemed to be depressed. He sensed that this was not the type of depression that people normally have and run to psychiatrists. For this young man was feeling some sort of a disgust for the life of the world, the life of the flesh. In Romans 8:6, we read, "For to be carnally minded is death." This young person found his way because he realized the very thing that was missing from his life. And this misery that he felt was the beginning of his return. Sometimes when we eat something that doesn't agree with us, we feel horrible, and we do not feel better until we actually vomit. This is not my example. It is also scriptural. My dear brothers, man was very happy in paradise because he had complete communion with God. When he was exiled, he quickly attempted to fix some makeshift to substitute, to make up for this great loss. These superficial forms of paradise vary. And one of these man-made forms of paradise is the high that is promised by the use of narcotics. Drug dealers promise a high by the help of the devil, and they deliver this high. But you pay a very high price. To buy the drug, you pay a high price for your health, a higher price when your children are born deformed, and the highest price of all is the loss of the soul. Someone who ODs sacrifices himself to the devil. These are the highs of drug users. Those that have experienced the misery and the agony and the withdrawal symptoms from some of these drugs, they no longer talk about fun and paradise, but true hell. These drugs introduce people to a living hell. Drugs today are circulating just about everywhere and in all classes of people. They do quite well in school grounds and surprisingly enough in suburban schools as well. You don't need to search very far to find them. They will most likely find you. They will find you, or you will find them at the nightclubs or the bars, at certain parties, at mall arcades, and especially at rock concerts, where massive quantities are being sold by the merchants of death. We could describe all these places by a verse in Proverbs 7:27. Paths of Hades leading to the chambers of death. Hades and death is lurking behind all these places, and spiritual young people have no business hanging around these places. Our young people from the junior high school years want to window shop at the mall, meet some school friends, have a soda, and walk around or make a day of it and catch a movie at the mall. If you must go to the mall, you can go with your parents or your relatives or your spiritual brothers and sisters if they're of age. Unfortunately, most teenagers today do not even want to be seen with their parents around these places, let alone go there with them. St. Peter talks about those who keep company with falsehood. And this false company, this bad company, will lead you towards the life of falsehood or towards the paths of Hades, leading to the chambers of death. St. Peter, in his second epistle, also says, for a man is a slave to whatever has mastered him. Alcohol, cigarette smoking, and narcotics become harsh masters over people's lives. But the bondage and the dependency that takes place from certain drugs, like heroin or cocaine, goes beyond measure. And drug addicts are some of the most pitiful people in society. May God have mercy on them and all of us. We cannot be talking about cure in the area of drugs. The only cure is abstention. We can never cure an alcohol or a drug addict. There is no cure. We can talk about rehabilitation, but never cure. The memory of the drug or alcohol or nicotine is never erased from the brain, and the desire can be triggered at any time, even years later, as we stated earlier. Outside of existential reasons, people using drugs to add some meaning to their otherwise purposeless life, some people use drugs and alcohol as coping mechanisms to cope with their insecurities. They're afraid to take some of their challenges head on, so they feel that this or that drug will give them the extra edge or the confidence that they may lack.